Alasdair, good to speak with you again.
Yes, nice to speak to you too.
Why don't we add our friend Rory to this call as well?
Yep. Something has come up with a picture of Rory and his beautiful bride, I guess. Or it might be someone else's beautiful bride.
No, that's my beautiful bride, and nobody can have her.
How are you, Rory?
I'm doing well. I hope you are, Alasdair. How you doing, Sean?
I am doing terrific. Rory, thanks for asking. And boy, guys, do we have a lot to talk about today. Alasdair, it's hard to imagine how much has happened since the last time we spoke. As we like to say, Rory and I like to document the collapse. And I think that's exactly what we're going to be doing here today as well. There's a lot of collapse to document, isn't there?
There is. Well, I went off on holiday for 10 days and I left the world in your capable hands. And look what happened.
You know, we do our best, Alasdair. We do our best, but
it's not good enough.
Sometimes our best is not good enough.
Dear, dear.
Well, why don't we just jump in, fellas? Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. We have back on the line our good friend Alasdair Macleod from financeandeconomics.org, and Rory has been kind enough to join us today as well. Alasdair, how are things in the UK?
Well, they're all right. We're in the throes of a general election, the longest general election run-up that we've ever had. Normally, a general election is called about, I suppose, 4 or 5 weeks ahead of the event. Our run-up on this one has been 100 days, literally from the beginning of January. So we're getting rather bored with it. But anyway, that's our problem, not yours.
Well, how do politicians have time to get any real work done on behalf of the people when they're so busy running for elections and re-elections? That's really the age-old problem with politics. And speaking of politics, guys, on this call, I want to talk about Greece. I want to talk about the bogus BLS report. I want to talk about the smash of gold and silver prices on Friday. I want to talk about so very much, including the Swiss National Bank removing its peg from the euro, as well as the ECB pledging 60 billion euros in quantitative easing every single month. But I should let you guys know, I've been following Yanis Varoufakis on Twitter, and I just want to read this for you. This is sort of his profile statement. Economics professor quietly writing obscure academic texts for years until thrust onto the public scene by Europe's inane handling of an inevitable crisis. Athens, Greece. That's Yanis Varoufakis. Follow him on Twitter. Gentlemen, there's so much going on. Do you want to start with Greece? Do you want to start with the ECB? Would you like to start with the Swiss National Bank? Would you like to start with the BLS report? Alasdair, where would you like to start?
Well, I don't know. I just toss the dice, I think. Let's start with Greece, shall we?
Let's do it. Yanis Varoufakis, a man who is standing up to the banksters, standing up to austerity, standing up to those that want to enslave the people. What do you make of Yanis Varoufakis? Is he just a socialist? Is he a wolf in sheep's clothing, or is he really trying to do a good thing on behalf of his people, the people of Greece?
Well, I have no doubt that he's trying to do the best for the people of Greece. He describes himself as a Marxist liberal, which seemed to me to be a bit of a contradiction in terms. Now, I don't know whether he was just coming up with a description for the purposes of his public persona, but Greece does actually have a problem with this. I have no doubt that they are so hosed off with the banking community. They see the big investment banks as being counterproductive. Remember, Goldman Sachs cost Greece a lot of money going way back because they persuaded the Greeks to take out derivatives, which had a downside.
Yep.
And
a big downside, and Mario Draghi's a former Goldman Sachs alum, correct?
Well, exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's all that sort of stuff. I mean, I think there was no clearer signal than Varoufakis turning up at 11 Downing Street. We have never in our lives seen a finance minister turn up in a leather jacket without a tie. I mean, he was making a statement. He was saying, I'm not your normal guy. This is completely different, and I'm not going to kowtow to the establishment. I'm anti-establishment. The message was so clear. And I think that sort of sets the tone for the thing. The problem that the Eurozone now has is if they come to a compromise with Greece, then you've got problems with Spain because you've got a similar movement starting in Spain. You're going to have Italy turning around and say, hey, how about us? And Portugal. And I think that the eurozone finance ministers are actually between a rock and a hard place in this. There is really not a lot they can do, and I think that the ECB's approach is quite simple. That if you don't like what we're doing, then we won't support you. And if your banks fall over, then that's your bloody problem. So I think the net position over the next few weeks, I think, is that the situation is likely to deteriorate in Europe rather than find a resolution. And that, I think, should worry us.
It definitely worries us. And let me point this out to you guys. Rory, did you see this? Zero Hedge was reporting today that Greece has received its ultimatum from Eurogroup. Greece must apply for bailout extension by February 16th to keep the Eurozone financial backing. And Zero Hedge is sort of reading between the lines, saying the penalty for not falling into place is terminal bank runs and capital controls. Alasdair, who is Eurogroup and what does it mean to Greece? Why should Greece fall into place and play ball with these people?
Well, my understanding is that there is a meeting of finance ministers, an emergency meeting of finance ministers in Brussels next week. And presumably that's what Zero Hedge means when they say the Euro group. I suppose that it's probably not just the Eurozone, but it might also involve other EU finance ministers, such as George Osborne from here, and also, the Danish finance minister. In other words, finance ministers from, sort of covering all the currencies in the European Union as well as the euro. No, I think it's going to be a rough meeting. I mean, the other thing is that the ECB is going to pull the plug on February the 28th. I think that Varoufakis already knew that before he was appointed, and indeed ahead of the election. It seems to me that the whole approach has been we're just not going down that route. Full stop. And I think I think this actually could be very disruptive. I can't see any point in Greece leaving the eurozone, or sorry, yes, coming out of the euro as such, or leaving the eurozone. If they did that, then they would have to. I think the only thing they could do is set up a currency board so that the new drachma tracks the euro, because the only currency that actually circulates around Greece is the euro. And that's what people use. And so coming out of the euro, as it were, I don't really see as an option. And unless they set up a proper currency board, I think that the new drachma, if that's what we end up with, would actually collapse quite rapidly.
Okay, well, why don't we turn things back domestically just for the next part of this conversation, because I think we need to talk about the BLS report on Friday. Rory, I'm sure that you've been following this pretty closely. Gold was down $31 on Friday, silver down 54 cents to $16.68. I was listening to the Silver Doctor's conversation this morning with Turd Ferguson, and Turd noted that the big banks are short 608 million ounces of silver on the COMEX. And it's just more of the same, isn't it?
It is. It is just more of the same. What I found stunning was that in January, the U.S. Mint sold 5.53 million ounces of Eagles. They're still currently being allocated. And the Royal Canadian Mint is also on an allocation basis as well. So that tells me that the banksters, how they can come up with the 600 or million ounces of paper silver is mind-boggling when we are in fact looking at allocated product coming from the two largest mints on the planet.
Yeah, that's right. And I think Turd sort of made the distinction in that conversation too about the paper market versus the physical market, meaning that the physical market, we see real world demand for physical precious metals, but of course the paper demand, the paper market is a completely derivatives-based, COMEX-based paper Ponzi that, it doesn't have any relation to the real physical market at all. So 608 million ounces of silver short on the COMEX, that's roughly equal to the worldwide net production of physical silver on an annual basis. That's a whole year's worth of production they're short. Alasdair, were you surprised to see gold and silver down on Friday, or are you smart enough to be able to make money from this predictable silver smash and gold smash that
I t-
happens every time a BLS report comes out?
Sean, I tell you what, I'm smart enough not to lose money.
Yeah.
And do you know how I achieve that? I don't deal. Simple as that. I have whatever gold and silver I deem to be necessary for my future locked up,
Yeah.
and I don't give a damn about the day to day. Trading it, I think, is a mug's game. I would lose money if I traded it. I really would. I think the events on Friday were pretty good evidence that anyone who takes a reasonably sensible, educated approach to trading gold and silver would have got killed. I mean, the fact of the matter is that you've got some very, very big banks with very big short positions, as you've just been describing in the silver market. It's also true in gold. Those short positions are getting larger, and they will use every opportunity to try and shake out the stops on the longs, so that they can get their books at least under some sort of control. Their basic problem, I think, and I was interested in what you're saying about sales of Silver Eagles and so on, their basic problem is that ordinary people in the advanced economies are now beginning to think that having a bit of gold and silver is a good idea. There is interest picking up in physical metal. And that, of course, is the death of the bullion banks.
Yes, it is. And we can only hope that it comes more sooner than later.
Well, the trouble is, I'm not sure that I like what comes with it. that's the trouble, Rory.
No.
Otherwise, I share your sentiment entirely.
Well, and along those same lines, I mean, that's what scares me the most about Greece, because you have the same thing. You have the same issue, except if Greece does, in fact, if they are allowed to pull out of the euro and reintroduce the drachma, if they are, in fact, allowed to leave the European Union, what kind of consequences will that create? That, to me, is much more terrifying than the bullion banks going bust over gold and silver.
Well, may I read something for you guys? And then, Alasdair, comment on what Rory just said there, because you wrote on January 30th, more Euro tragedy, and things have been really escalating since then. I want to read this to you guys from our friends at LaRouche PAC. This is a pretty dramatic paragraph, but I want to read it. With suicidal mania, the British Empire is going for broke, both with its military confrontation policy against Russia and China and with its insistence on the genocidal austerity policy epitomized by the Troika rape of Greece. Should these policies prevail, they will bring mankind to extinction, most likely through thermonuclear war. Now, the LaRouche people have been talking about thermonuclear war based on the policy of NATO surrounding Russia and escalating things with Russia over the Ukraine. They've been talking about it for a very long time. As dramatic as that sounds, this is all very dramatic stuff. You know, the crash of the euro, the disintegration of the euro dream. If Greece leaves, Spain and Italy may not be that far behind. Alasdair, you were writing back there on January 30th about more euro tragedy. Can you tie this in? Can you help people understand how this is all so dramatic? This stuff is really, really a big deal.
There's an awful lot in what you've just been saying. I have a bit of a different take on events from the article that you quoted. Not my article, but the other one you quoted, with which I wasn't familiar. Firstly, I think that it is the lesser of two evils as far as the Eurozone is concerned if Greece leaves, rather than they give in to Greece and then have to give in to Spain, Italy, and so on and so forth. If Greece leaves, I think that that would probably smarten up Spain and Italy rather than get them demanding more out of the Troika. So I think I feel quite clear on that point, and that's rather at odds, I think, with that article that you were quoting. Yes, and the other thing which I'm slightly at odds with is the position of the UK. The UK is not really taking an active part in this. I mean, we are basically America's lapdog. We believe in the special relationship and all this sort of stuff. And what's interesting is that the initiative has not been taken by Britain, it's been taken by France and Germany in flying over to Kiev and then going on to Moscow. And I find that absolutely fascinating. Where is the Foreign Secretary for the UK? Where is the Foreign Secretary for the European Union, who used to be Lady Ashton? I don't know if she still is. You've basically got two powerful leaders who have taken matters into their own hands, and they're going to go and do something about it. And I think that Britain, who would normally see themselves in that sort of role, leading for Europe, we are sidelined in this. I think what is interesting, however, is that this Ukrainian situation, I think, is getting deadly serious. I am very concerned about it. There is a brinkmanship which I can see being played with America and a lapdog Britain, if you like, following on behind, threatening to introduce more weapons, not quite boots on the ground, but military help, whatever. You've got a bankrupt Ukraine who need that help if NATO is not going to lose, and you've got Putin on the other side, who basically is quite happy to see the Ukraine go bust, quite happy to see people shiver in the Ukraine because they can't pay for their gas bills, and get his own way, if you like, by those means. So this is actually, I think, a very, very worrying time. And I think both sides are basically escalating the situation, probably the West more than Putin. I'm just, I'm relieved, if you like, that both Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande are trying to do something about it. And what is interesting in all this is that we have our friends Greece again talking to Russia, and Russia saying, well, we might be able to help you out if, let's say, you permit us to extend the South gas pipeline from Turkey through your territory. There's a basis of a deal there. Now, this is really stirring things up as far as the European Union is concerned. It is going to be a very interesting 2 or 3 weeks coming up, and I just hope that it doesn't develop into something approaching a Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, me too. And you mentioned Holland and Merkel trying to do something about it. They made a unscheduled visit, Holland and Merkel did, to Kiev and then Russia. What do you make of that? And by the way, I agree with you about the British Empire being a lapdog of the U.S. I believe the U.S. government is a lapdog of the CIA and of Wall Street. So really, instead of saying, the British Empire, I really think what we're talking about is the City of London and Wall Street. It always comes back to the banksters, doesn't it, Alasdair?
Well, yes. I mean, fine. Give me control of the money, and you can do what you want with the rest. Sort of thing is what a Rothschild said I think 2 centuries ago. And if he did say that, it is obviously true. The central banks, in a sense, they issue the money, but they don't really have control over it. The banks issue bank credit, yes. And the central banks are now in the most awful situation because they've tried everything in terms of printing money to keep the show on the road, and it's achieved absolutely nothing. How on earth they manage to judge anything when all their statistics are so corrupted, I really don't know. You made reference earlier to the BLS unemployment figures. That's a complete joke, that. I love the article by Jim Clifton, who's the chairman and CEO of Gallup, who said the percentage of Americans that are employed full-time has been hovering near record lows. Now, is that a 5.6% or 5.7% unemployment rate? No, it's not. And, that guy actually knows what he's talking about. What worries me is that you've got government statisticians who are so obviously in the pocket of the politicians. And that is, it's dishonest, it's misleading.
I'm looking at Jim Clifton's original article that was released on February the 3rd, The Big Lie, 5.6% unemployment. And what I find most interesting about that is the fact that he came out, he did tell the truth. He's, basically said that this is all smoke and mirrors. And then on the 5th, on February the 5th, 2 days later, he comes out and basically redacts the whole thing and says that, and this is a quote, this is from Wall Street on Parade, and he says, this is quoting Jim Clifton, "I think that the number that comes out of the BLS and the Department of Labor is very, very accurate. I need to make that very, very clear. so that I don't suddenly disappear.
Right.
I need to make it home tonight.
I think that was. I don't think he was retracting anything there. I think he was just, he was rubbing it in, saying, I might get rubbed out for telling the truth.
Well, he's probably.
I hope that bit's wrong, by the way.
Oh, I do too. He's probably well aware of the long list of dead banksters, though. So, I mean, tongue in cheek is tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
But, behind every little tongue in cheek joke sometimes is a morsel of truth.
Yes, well, I hope not in this case. But anyway, he's to my mind, he's a good guy for speaking out.
Yeah.
And long may he live.
Yeah, long may he live. Well, let's just talk about this BLS report because Michael Snyder from Economic Collapse blog is reporting that only 44% of U.S. adults are employed for 30 hours or more per week. 44% of U.S. adults. I think that the fact that the BLS continues to come out with these ridiculous reports saying that the economy is good and we've picked up 400,000 jobs, they don't even make any mention of what's going on in the energy industry. They don't make any mention of the shale industry in this country being absolutely decimated because of the plummeting price of oil. One of the things that really ties this all together is the fact that the Mockingbird mainstream media in this country and all over the globe, essentially, will not tell people the truth. As we've long pointed out to people, even Brian Williams at NBC is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and now Brian Williams is ensnared in an absolute epic story about the fact that he's a bold-faced liar, having made up a story about being in Iraq and the helicopter he was in taking RPG fire. The pilots have come forward to say that was 100% not true. And that's a story that Brian Williams repeated time and time again, including in an appearance on David Letterman. He told the story with reverence and passion as though it truly happened and it was all a lie. If the man can't tell the truth about an experience in his own life, then how are we to believe anything he tells us on the nightly news? That's what we're up against.
I think that's a very fair point. There is a problem, I think, that the mainstream media has, and that is that if they produce a line of comment which doesn't support the status quo, then their sources of information get cut off.
Yeah, well, that's true. Their access, when you're a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, you're already getting your talking points anyway. As I've noted before, Aaron Burnett at CNBC is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. They've turned the CFR into something that publicly facing appears to be a little bit benign, but if we're going to have people in our media being members of a bankster organization that you need to be invited to join, it's not open to the public. That's the reason our website exists. The antidote to corporate propaganda, SGT report. That's why we do what we do. That's why you do what you do, Alasdair. That's why Rory does what he does with the Daily Coin. We're out there trying to disseminate truth, and so often we're ahead of the story. We're ahead of the story on 9/11, which we've been saying is a false flag since day one. And now it's becoming a big deal, even in some of the more mainstream publications like Huffington Post. There are 28 classified pages of the 9/11 report that have not been made public because they implicate the Saudis in 9/11. They implicate Saudi Arabia as having helped fund the 9/11 operation. And as we've been saying again from day one, there's a lot more to the story than Saudi funding of 9/11. You've got the Mossad in there, and you've got intelligence assets from both the UK and the United States involved in the 9/11 operation. And the only reason I'm bringing this up, guys, is because the mainstream media will not discuss the 28 classified pages. The 28 pages that implicate Saudi Arabia. And who was just in Saudi Arabia? Barack Obama, pledging his fealty to the Saudis and again, never addressing the truth of the matter, which is the real terror, the terror that we're always told we should give up our liberties and rights for, starts where? Where does it start? It starts with our allies. It starts with these intelligence agencies. It starts at home. So often it starts at home.
CIA.
CIA.
That is extremely worrying. But sort of broadening it out into more generally, what amazes me is how it is that the, if you like, the World Gold Council, Thomson Reuters, and all the rest of it report China's demand for gold. They just sort of I don't know, they come up with figures which are less than half the true demand because, the deliveries that you get, and incidentally, something like 250 tons or something this in January. I mean, it's a huge amount. Um, that is delivered out of the vaults into public hands. Now that doesn't even include, and this is something which Koos Janssen hasn't, I think, approached. It doesn't include the gold that is retained in the vaults, backing, if you like, allocated accounts with the Chinese banks. There are, I don't know, the last I saw, there were well over 2.5 million accounts. Now, I don't know if they were all allocated or some of them unallocated, but those that are allocated accounts with those banks will have that gold still within the vaulting system. In other words, it hasn't been delivered out of the vaults. So we're talking about a huge amount of demand for gold has been covered up. And there are two other things about this too. That is that no 1 kilo bars refined by a Chinese-owned refinery are ever seen in the vaulting system. I know that because I've spoken to our vaulters in Hong Kong about this. Now, there's quite a lot of gold is exported from China back into Hong Kong. They have never seen a 1 kilo bar. Also, I talked to the Swiss refiners, and of course they get bars from everywhere, which come in to be refined, re-refined, and then exported, usually off to China again. They have never ever seen Chinese 1 kilo bars. So it is interesting. So that tells me, well, it's either of two possibilities. Either the Chinese customs, which forbids the export of gold, if you like, without a license, is so thorough that nobody actually manages to get out of China with any gold.
Wow.
Believable?
Yeah.
Believable? Or the alternative is that the figures that you see are somewhat made up in that the refined gold is kept by the government. It must be, because otherwise it would be delivered into general circulation. So what that tells me is that it is more than likely that almost all the Chinese gold production actually is retained by the government. That would be very, very much in accordance with the original plans when they set this whole thing up with enabling legislation back in 1983.
Well, let me read this to you guys. This comes from our buddy, the Wealth Watchman. In his latest, he's writing about Chinese demand for gold. He's talking specifically about the SGE. And listen to this about Chinese gold withdrawals. In the first 3 weeks alone, China has removed over 202 tons of gold from available gold supply. Now, I know that usually in the earlier part in the year, China ups its stacking game due to the new year, but still, the Chinese have bought what roughly amounts to 10 tons per day for the first 3 weeks of the year. The Earth minus China and Russia only mines about 7 tons per day. So once again, you have Western countries shipping out huge numbers of legacy gold just to buy time. Remember the Ukrainian gold that was stolen by the West just after Victoria Nuland's coup in Kiev? Yeah, that huge 30-ton gold hoard won't last 3 days in Shanghai. And I tell you what, these guys are hoarding gold. You know, again, I'll refer to the Silver Doctor's conversation with Turd, Rory, in which Turd said, you know when the game will change? The game will change when China comes out and says they have 15,000 tons of gold.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I don't know they will make a declaration like that because it's not China's style to go and sort of destabilize markets. I think they're very, very sensitive to not being blamed for the West's self-visited problems, which is really what we're talking about. Yeah. And I think that the Chinese are likely to, at some stage, take a slightly different approach to this. And that is, if they can't get their US treasuries back, then it's going to be in their interest to see the gold price rise to the point where they're compensated for the loss of those treasuries. I just throw that thought in. because I think that actually is something which is very, very important. Also, we've got a similar situation with Russia, because Russia, as we know, has been very aggressively adding to her official reserves. For all I know, she has also been adding to unofficial reserves, in other words, non-monetary gold. She might have been building that. It wouldn't surprise me at all. And that being the case, she's got a nuclear weapon, a financial nuclear weapon, in her hands. If she wants to destabilize the West, then she's in a position to drive up the gold price and benefit from it. So, this situation where we're all sort of sitting here worrying about a 2% fall on Friday and all the rest of it, actually, it really doesn't matter, because there's a far bigger picture out there which we ought to be aware of.
Yeah, we've said before, Alasdair, the biggest story in the history of the world is the story taking place behind the scenes. It's the stuff going on between the central banks and the banksters at the highest level, the story which is never told, the story which we don't know, but wouldn't you love to be privy to the conversations between Jamie Dimon and Mario Draghi and the people at the highest levels of this Ponzi scheme? They must be scrambling behind the scenes, and it sure would be interesting to hear the NSA recordings of those conversations.
I think I would like to. I don't disagree with that. But the trouble is that they're all Keynesians and they talk such rubbish. I think I'd get rather bored with it. But what I would far rather see is, I would rather have access to the Russian intelligence files on Western gold holdings.
Yes. And
that would really interest me.
Yeah, and on 9/11. I would like them to come clean on what they know about 9/11, just as they came clean on what happened with MH17. The Russian intelligence on the shoot-down of MH17 was far more thorough and convincing than anything coming from John Kerry.
Yes, I think that's right. I agree with you entirely. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, fellas, we've given this a good 30 minutes to document the collapse. We should probably wrap it up here pretty quickly. I know that early on in the interview I said I wanted to talk about the Swiss National Bank deciding it didn't want to continue down this suicidal path, so it sort of startled the markets. Some people saw it coming, others didn't. But when the Swiss National Bank depegged the franc from the euro, what did you make of that, Alasdair?
Well, I really thought, I thought at the time they had no alternative. It was beginning to be clear to the Swiss National Bank that, the euro is going down. The Greek situation was going to be, make things a lot more difficult. And on that basis, to continue with the peg just really wasn't realistic. I'd now sort of add this thought, and that is that I think it's only a matter of time before Denmark has to give up its peg as well.
Oh.
The time could be next week. I mean, there really is no point. Denmark now has negative interest rates, and not only has she negative interest rates, but at one point last week, as I understand it, you could even get a negative interest rate mortgage. I mean, that is how ridiculous, how distorted the domestic Danish financial market has become.
Wow.
It's a complete nonsense.
How does a negative interest rate mortgage work? The bank will pay you to take a mortgage? I'm not even sure what that means.
Basically, yes.
Sign me up.
Yeah. You see, the thing is that the bank has to finance itself. It finances itself, if you like, from the central bank. So the central bank, if the central bank has minus 0.75%, then the bank, a competitive bank passes it on. It is complete lunacy.
Wow, they've really destroyed the meaning of money entirely. I mean, they really have. Because the meaning of money, as we all know, is when we go to work every day, guys, we trade our labor, we trade our physical bodies for money. And when these banksters can degrade that money at their own whim and print it endlessly, they're degrading our labor. They're degrading our sovereignty as human beings. They're taking our ability to save, our ability to have fair trade for our labor for money. That's why we keep coming back to silver and gold in physical form. Because, yes, they control the paper markets, but they don't control the physical paradigm. If you get the physical stuff in your possession, you at least have a shot at retaining your sovereignty. You at least have a shot at retaining the labor that you've given away for some tangible asset that will hold its value 100 years from now, 10 years from now, a year from now, because these banksters are out of control. They've destroyed the absolute concept of money.
Yes,
It'll,
and I agree with that entirely, Sean. And I was actually thinking about this before we started this podcast. I mean, really, the central banks, I think, have come to the end of the road. I mean, when you get a number of central banks, driving interest rates into negative territory. I mean, as you say, it is unnatural. It is completely unnatural. When you look at the level of bond yields, 10-year bond yields, the Swiss 10-year is a negative figure. If you look at Spain, it's something like 1.8% or 1.7%. I mean, would you lend money to Spain for 10 years at 1.7%? I mean, I certainly wouldn't. And Italy is a similar level. France is less than 1%. I think it's something like 0.55%. Would you lend money to France for 10 years? I mean, a bankrupt country? No. The whole thing is completely wrong. And I actually wrote an article about this, which was published on Friday. It just, the whole idea that we can get interest rates to these levels, that it is such a distortion that we are at the end of the road. And the reason I know we're at the end of the road in this process is because not one, but two central banks are now imposing, in fact, actually the ECB as well, are imposing negative rates. Now that is the end of the road for bond prices. And I think that the shock that we're going to get isn't going to be an interest rate rise. It's going to be a bond collapse. Now, I know that everybody's been calling for a collapse in bond prices for the last 3 years. Anyone who says that there's going to be a collapse in bond prices gets laughed at. Okay, laugh at me. But I really do think that logically we have now come to the end of that road. And if you get a collapse in bond prices, which may be triggered by a Greek banking crisis, I don't know, then under those circumstances, I think that you will then start getting an erosion of confidence in paper currencies, which can only be dealt with by a rise in interest rates. And that is going to be very, very difficult for the central banks.
Well, guys, let's round out the conversation this way by just observing the fact that it wasn't long ago that it was announced that Russia forgave $30 billion, I think $31 billion of debt that Cuba owed. And by contrast, we have the IMF indebting nations to unrepayable debt, case in point, Greece. And if we want to talk about who the real terrorists are on planet Earth, it's the financial terrorists that want to roll out austerity and enslave generations to unrepayable debt. And at the end of the day, I think that's what Yanis Varoufakis is trying to rebel against, the financial terrorism that has Greece in its stronghold.
I'm slightly sort of wary about this because this idea of austerity is a sort of catch-all phrase. If a government actually seriously addresses its liabilities, then that sort of austerity makes sense. If, on the other hand, it doesn't do so, and it's still got those liabilities, it ends up in the position that Greece has got itself into.
Right.
And I would draw a distinction between those two things. The third route is accept reality, scrub everything, just go bust, and then watch everything recover. Stand back and just watch everything recover, because it will if you do that.
That's right.
But that's not something which is in the DNA of politicians.
No, you're absolutely right. And I want to draw the same distinction then about, what's fair is fair in love and war. Look at what's going on in the United States. We have at least $202 trillion in unfunded liabilities. So I don't think the U.S. government, if we're going to be honest about it, is in a whole lot better shape than any other government on the planet. And in fact, you might make the argument that we're in a lot worse shape. The only thing that we have saving us is the dollar as the world's reserve currency. But yeah, if we wanted to try to pay off all our debt in this country, you'd have to roll out austerity tomorrow and enslave generations. I think the alternative is much better. Debt jubilee, let's let all of this collapse, let's start over. But you know what? If all the nations were allowed to start over, then the banksters wouldn't retain this stranglehold on humanity. And that's what we're having these conversations about. I want people to realize the enemy of humanity at this point is the banksters. It's humanity versus the banksters. That's the way I see it.
I think that's probably a fair description. Yes,
I would agree.
Alasdair, why don't you tell us about your website and where people can find your great work?
Yeah, well, I do a lot of writing for Gold Money, where I'm head of research, and that's goldmoney.com. And I also have my own website, which is financeandeconomics, one word, .org.
Well, very good. And Rory, you've got a lot of irons in the fire. As people know, you're a contributor at SGT Report, and you have a website of your own you've started.
I do, and I'm daily contributor there at SGT Report. I'm very, very proud to be on the team. And the dailycoin.org is where you can find some of my original stuff.
We value both of you gentlemen very much, and we value everybody for taking the time to click play and listen to this conversation. We're all in this mess together, and it's getting really hard to track it all. I'll be honest with you. Alasdair, I had 2 pages of notes, and I think we only got through about half of them today.
Well, that'll give us some material for next time, so better not leave it too long, I think.
All right, absolutely. Guys, thanks for listening. Have a great week.